Many of you by now have figured out that I've started making bowstrings. In fact, in the past month I've made around 20 bowstrings, so it's served a lot of hands-on learning. Now there's been a huge demand for tutorials on this part of archery, and I thought this would be a good chance to share what I've learned. I want to make it very clear in this video that I'm not an expert in making bowstrings. I've been taught to make bowstrings, I've done research, I've seen other sources, and I'm using my own experiences. I do want to say that I do use my bowstrings, they work, and to me, that's a pass grade. A lot of people want to learn how to make bowstrings, partly out of curiosity, partly out of practicality. It's a pretty handy skill for an archer to have, and anyone who wants to take archery seriously may want to consider learning to make their own bowstrings. This is, however, no means a requirement. Unfortunately, the knowledge of how to make a bowstring, though not very complex, tends to be passed from person to person, so it's actually a little hard to find a centralized source of information for everything you need to know about making bowstrings. There are so many different aspects to this particular aspect of archery that I don't want to cram everything into one video. Instead, I'm going to make several videos in this series to cover different aspects in detail. Now, again, I'm not an expert. What I do works, and everyone does it slightly differently. This is where I welcome you to share your experiences and your knowledge. I'm using what I've gathered from various sources, from what I've been taught by my coach, what I've researched online, as well as my own hands-on experience. To start off, however, this video will cover the question of why should you make bowstrings? As you know by now, most bows you buy come with a bowstring. Now these things are pretty tough and they can last for well over a year, depending on how often you use it. For a competitive archer, they may chew through a string in around 6 months. If it wears out, no problem, you can easily buy a new string. Buying a string is really easy. In fact, they're so readily available, it's the easiest option for most archers. You can get factory-made strings from brands like Cartel and Win & Win, or you can buy a string and get it made for you at an archery pro shop. Getting it made for you is a good alternative because you can choose the colors you want your string. It's made by obviously people with good experience. You can choose the specific length to suit your bow and your brace height. In fact, many people can get away with never learning to make a string for the entire archery career, and there's nothing wrong with that. Even the price of a string is very reasonable. A Dacron bowstring will cost around $10, while a high-performance fast flight string for modern bows will cost around $25. Compare that to the price of making your own string. Firstly, you need a string jig, and buying one of those can cost a couple hundred. You could make your own, but you still need to get the materials to make the jig. Next, you need the string material. They come in spools like this one, and depending on the material, it can cost anywhere between $20 for Dacron to $40 to $50 for a Dyneema style string. And it depends on the size of the spool as well. You also need serving material, and you need a fair amount of time. It does take around 45 minutes to make a string, depending on how experienced you are and how focused you are. And really, if you're only ever going to make one string, this isn't worth it. But if you're in a position where you need to make many strings, being able to make your own strings is a huge asset. The most obvious example is working in a pro shop, but outside of that, the most common situation is if you're part of a club. Clubs have lots of equipment, they go through lots of wear and tear, and if you have someone at the club who can make strings, that means you can bring your bows back into operation. There are a lot of bows which are destrung, or the strings are way too damaged to use, and they're left unstrung and unused. So rather than leave them there unused and being a waste of space and a waste of resources, having someone at the club who can mass produce strings is a huge benefit. In fact, one of my recent projects was to look through my school's inventory to get the bows, look at the strings, and get them back into operation so more people can experience archery. Speaking of clubs, you will have club members who will need new strings. Now, they can buy their strings, but the problem of buying a string is that you have to wait for it to be made and then sent to you. You have to pay shipping cost, or otherwise you're buying a generic factory-made string. If someone at the club can make a string, you can personalize the string for the archer on the spot. And from an individual perspective, you have so much more control over what you are doing with your strings. If your string is like slightly damaged, then you're not really, confident about getting a new string. If you can make your own, just make one. If you're tired of one color, you can use another color. You can choose exactly what your string will look like. The right colors, the materials, even the serving size. You control that. And being able to make your own string means that you're not held back by this. As far as cost effectiveness is concerned, apart from the price of getting a string jig, it's far cheaper to make your own strings than to buy them. The benchmark price for a fast flight string is US $25. This spool of thread costs $30 US. And I can make around 10 strings from this. That depends on how long the strings are and how many threads I use. But for a ballpark figure, let's say about 10 to 15 strings. If you factor in the cost of the serving material, I'd say that a personally handmade string costs a quarter of the price of buying a string from the shop. Most of the price in buying a string comes from the time and effort and the labor. If you can make your own strings, you're cutting all that out. If you're making a string for a clubman, for example, all you're paying is the price of the material. And you might even do that if the club is buying a set of string making tools, like a string jig and a selection of colors. That might be covered in your membership fee, so you might even charge that. Bottom line is, whether you're making it for a club or you're making it for yourself, it is more cost effective to make your own strings. Again, one thing that you can do by making your own strings is to choose exactly what you want. For the sake of business, shops probably won't give you that many options. Sure, you can buy the materials in the shop, but if you ask the shop to, say, make you a green and black bowstring, they'll just make you a green and black bowstring. If you want to have specific materials like Dyneema or 8125, then you can do that if you make your own strings. If you prefer using specific size serving threads or a specific brand, you can do that if you make your own string. Shops probably won't offer that service because it just takes too much time and effort to customize a string. That's something which, as a professional archer, you may wish to do yourself. One of the secondary benefits to learn to make your own bowstring is knowing how to do string maintenance. The string is one of the few parts of a bow that actually require maintenance. So if you see a problem like a loose serving, that's not a problem. You can fix that. And of course, you take pride in what you make. I made this string, I use string in competitions. If there's a fault in the string, it's a fault in me. Now, I'm the kind of person who likes taking the time to do something carefully and precisely, and if you like this sort of thing, then string making is just for you. Otherwise, even though it can be tedious and it can be time-consuming, it's not a very hard skill to acquire. If you don't mind the process of learning to make a string and taking time to make one, then being able to make your own string makes you a more complete archer. Anyway, hope you found that interesting. In the next few videos, we'll be looking at the equipment you need to make bowstrings, as well as the actual process of making a bowstring from start to finish. This is NUSensei, and I'll see you next time.